Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today is another episode of the SL Show. Now, today we're going to be talking about some of the games from last night, including, of course, Carmelo Anthony's debut with the Portland Trailblazers. Then it's going to be another segment of Under the Radar. And then last, I'm going to talk about the Bleacher Report article that came out yesterday, a feature article about LaMelo Ball, and some really interesting tidbits that I found within that article that I want to share with you guys. But first up, we of course have to begin with about last night. And the most important thing that happened in the NBA last night, at least according to Twitter, was Carmelo Anthony's debut with the Portland Trailblazers in an 11-point loss to the Pelicans, put up 10 points on 14 shots, and kind of had an up and down night. Now, I want to stress that we have to make sure to give this whole situation some time to develop, because I'm honestly surprised that he ended up playing so quickly after signing with the team and that he ended up starting, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that Damian Lillard did not play last night. And that's the other big part of this, not only like just preaching patience of just kind of letting Melo get back into the swing of things and being on an NBA team, but also we need to judge him on this Blazers team once they're at full strength and once Dame is playing, because of course he's going to end up taking more shots last night than he typically would once Damian Lillard comes back and is healthy. So in terms of my takeaways, it wasn't awful, right? Like, my expectations were pretty low for him, but when you look at the numbers, he made 2 threes, he pulled down 4 rebounds in just 23 minutes, and really that's what this team is going to need from him. Whether he's going to provide it or not, I don't know, but what this team needs essentially from Melo is some size at the 4 spot, a little bit of energy, not being awful defensively, and then the ability to space the floor from 3-point range, and for the most part, he did that last night. Now, in terms of some negatives, he had 5 turnovers in just those 23 minutes, and as I'm sure many people will talk about today, he was a -20 in plus minus. Now, the turnovers can be explained away just by the rust and not really being fully acclimated with his teammates and things like that. I mean, 5 in 23 minutes is still a ton, but you can kind of put that one to the side. And even the plus minus stuff, like, I'm really not worried about it right now. I mean, obviously being 20 points worse when Melo's on the floor is not great, but so much of that number is subjective. It's subjected to who you're playing with, who you're playing against in terms of the players on the floor, the situation of the game. You could come on the floor and make a couple of nice passes, make a couple of shots, but if the other team just doesn't miss when you're out there, then your plus minus is going to be bad. So I'm not putting a ton of stock into that, although I'm sure plenty of people will do that today and trying to trash his debut. And so all in all, I thought it was an okay debut. Like, he didn't blow me away or anything. It wasn't anything incredible, but he could be a pretty solid piece for them. I mean, they need the depth at the 4 spot. They need him to space the floor like I talked about earlier. And once Lillard comes back, this team should be able to find its way once Melo starts to get a little bit more acclimated. At least I hope that's the case, because they're starting to fall down the Western Conference standings pretty quickly. So amongst some of the negative numbers like the turnovers and the plus minus and the 14 shots and only 10 points, amongst all of those things, when you actually watch the game, I think there's some positive signs that this could actually end up working out relatively well for both him and the team. So again, pretty solid debut for Melo. Moving on now to the only other game I really want to talk about from last night. There were only 4 games, but this is another significant one on top of the Melo situation, and that's the Phoenix Suns. And they were, kind of the darlings of the early season, getting off to a good start, but they're starting to slip just a little bit. They lost by 4 to the Kings last night, and now they're sitting at 7-6 and have lost 4 of their last 6 games. And the most concerning part about all of this is their reliance, potentially over-reliance, on Ricky Rubio at the point guard spot, who left last night's game after just 16 minutes of play with an apparent back issue. Now, I can't overstate that if you're telling me at the beginning of the season that DeAndre Ayton is only going to play 1 game and the Suns are going to be 7-6 through 13 games, that is a massive overreach of the expectations that I thought that they should have going into the year, and they're playing much better than anybody thought that they would. Monty Williams is doing a great job. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. The issue here is, like I said, the over-reliance on Rubio and the possibility that he might not be able to stay healthy throughout the entire season. And the problem is, they just don't have a ton of point guard depth behind him. I mean, it's Tyler Johnson and Javon Carter are their backup point guards, and then obviously Devin Booker can slide over and have some of the on-ball responsibility as well as he has done in the past. But this could be a pretty big issue for a team that suddenly kind of looks like they're going to be pushing for a playoff spot in the West. And so this is going to be a relatively extended absence for Rubio. I mean, it's only back spasms, but it could end up being kind of a relatively consistent thing throughout the entire season. This is going to be a pretty big deal for them, and maybe there's a minor move to be made, whether it's a small trade or a free agency signing, to kind of shore up their point guard rotation in the off chance that Rubio ends up missing a good amount of games, because certainly until Ayton comes back, they're going to need Rubio to play in order for them to be playing well. They're 1-1 in the 2 full games that he's missed this year, but like I said, just such a different team when he's not on the floor in terms of the playmaking, the pace, all those different things. I mean, they only lost by 4 to a Kings team that's been playing better lately, even though he didn't play in the entire game. So it's not all doom and gloom. They're 7-6 through 13 games. Monty Williams looks like he's doing a really good job as coach. He should be able to find some answers to this potential issue, but it's just something to keep an eye on for a team that has been such a nice story to start this year. Moving on now to our under the radar segment, in which I essentially just go throughout the NBA and point out some players that are playing really well or really poorly that it doesn't really seem like a ton of people are talking about. And I've only got one player today, and this is someone that actually a lot of people in yesterday's video asked me to talk about when I was doing this segment, and that is DaVonte Graham. And I already kind of knew what was going on with DaVonte Graham. I follow him relatively closely, one, because the Hornets are the closest team to me here in North Carolina, but also because I actually played against this guy in high school. And so just some quick background on him from like a personal standpoint. He's actually from the same place that I'm from in North Carolina. He's from Raleigh. He went to Broughton High School. Actually played against him a couple of times in some scrimmages and things like that. And he wasn't super highly recruited out of high school. Like, I remember him being good for a high school player, but I certainly didn't think he was going to be like a really good NBA player or anything. And so initially he ended up signing with App State, which is a Division I school in North Carolina, but it's in a much smaller conference. It's not as big of a deal as some of the other really good in-state schools. But then he ended up taking a prep year at Brewster Academy after he left Broughton in high school and had a really good year for them, and suddenly all these schools were interested, like Kansas, who ended up signing with, and then he was a second-round pick in last year's draft, the 34th pick in the draft, and now suddenly as a second-year player after having, a solid rookie year for a second-round player, but nothing spectacular. Now all of a sudden he's averaging 18 points per game. He's shooting over 40% from 3 on over 8 3-point attempts per game. And to be completely honest, right now this guy's playing out of his mind. I mean, compared to really what the expectation was for him coming into the league, it was, he's going to be a steadying point guard. He's going to be able to run the offense. He's going to be a good playmaker. But now he has a neon green light from 3-point range, as do a lot of players on the Hornets. But part of me wonders if this is a sustainable thing for him from a statistical standpoint, and here's why. So I mentioned his numbers in the beginning, the 18 points, put that to the side, but 8 3-point attempts per game and shooting over 40% from 3 on those 8 attempts. This is the list of players that have done that for an entire season in NBA history. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Ray Allen. That's it. That's the entire list. Arguably the 3 greatest shooters the NBA has ever seen. That's the statistical company that DaVonte Graham has put himself in through the first 13 or 14 games of this season, if he's able to keep it up for an entire year. Now, granted, there's actually 2 other players this year that are doing that as well. Karl Anthony Towns and Kyle Lowry are both also shooting over 40% from 3 on over 8 attempts per game, but it's more about the sustainability of this. So this segment is partially about, hey, pay attention, DaVonte Graham is playing really well and the Hornets are actually a little bit of fun to watch play, but also I don't really know if this is sustainable. It would be incredible if it was, and I'm rooting for him, but at some point, I think these numbers are going to come back down to earth a little bit statistically, but still, DaVonte Graham, I'll give you some credit, man. Under the radar player at the moment in the NBA. And then last up now, typically I end the show with like a headline of the day, but this isn't really about the headline, it's more about the story and the article. So yesterday it was released on a Bleacher Report Mag article on LaMelo Ball over there in Australia, who was kind of getting some buzz as potentially the #1 overall pick in the upcoming draft. And to be completely honest, I read the article just because I wanted to keep up with it. I wanted to be informed about what's going on with him, but I am really honestly jaded against the Ball family in general, with the exception of Lonzo, because he's actually a pretty good player in the NBA. But when all that stuff was initially happening with the Ball family and LeVar specifically, I don't really have anything against the kids, but just my mindset about them was just so shaped around the way that LeVar was acting and these outlandish remarks. And I just thought they were a complete joke, except for obviously Lonzo, who's a pretty solid NBA player. And when I was reading the article, I was reading it through that lens of like, another Ball story, right? Like I promised myself to not really talk about the Ball family on this channel unless it was something real and legitimate, because so much about them has been so fake to this point, again, with the exception of Lonzo's performance in the NBA. However, and this is the reason that I wanted to talk about this, all that kind of got flipped just by reading this one article. Again, I was going into it like, oh, this guy's going to be the #1 pick. There's been all kinds of players that before the draft have been like, oh, this guy could be the #1 pick. Perry Jones was supposed to be the #1 overall pick however many years ago, and he ended up being picked late in the first round and never did anything in the league. So I didn't really put a whole lot of stock into it before reading the article. But then I start reading it, and some people were comparing him to Luka Doncic, and be prepared for a lot more of that over the next couple of years when you're talking about international prospects in a more traditional sense, because he's been so successful. That's that's going to be the new thing. But everybody just talks about how much potential this guy has, how much he loves to play basketball, how natural the game is to him. And this is from, grown men over there in Australia, his teammates. This is not from, 20-year-olds that are playing with him. These are from grown men that are saying, this guy's going to be really good in the NBA. But the article was about more than just like his basketball story in terms of his potential NBA draft position, because to be completely honest, I have to do so much more research and watch so much more on him to kind of form a real opinion about whether or not I think he's actually going to be good enough to be like a top 3 pick. But it was more about, I just completely forgot about, how difficult the past probably 2 years have been for this kid because of everything going on with his dad. I was just so salty about that. I was like, these guys are a joke. I never really thought about the fact that he was taken away from his junior year of high school. Then he went and played a season of basketball at a pro league in Lithuania of all places, and now he's playing overseas in Australia, away from all of his friends, basically having 2 years of what should have been his childhood taken away by his dad because he just didn't have any choice. And I don't know, I never really fully considered that side of this story. And so more than anything, I felt bad for him. Like, I really started to feel for him, and I really started to be on his side of this whole situation. And suddenly I'm rooting for LaMelo Ball. Like, going into this, I was like, if he ends up being the #1 pick, whatever, I'll buy into it when it actually becomes like a real thing. But now I'm going to follow him a lot more closely. And I understand that's the point of the article, but I'm so much more invested in him as a person and in not just like the ball motif or charade or whatever they have going on, but about him and his journey and how actually incredible it would be for him to overcome everything that he's gone through and be a top 3 pick and hopefully be a really good player. Like, just imagine how much social media buzz there would be over LaMelo if he ended up being like the #1 pick or a top 3 pick. Imagine how crazy his summer league games would be, his preseason games would be, his regular season games when he first starts out. It would probably eclipse Lonzo and maybe even what we've seen with Zion. And I'm suddenly really excited about what his future could hold, because I think it's so much more of a story of overcoming obstacles than it ever should have been in the first place. But it just adds so much more intrigue, even though, I kind of feel bad that that's the way his story ended up going. But yeah, that's going to be the end of today's episode of the SL Show. I thank you guys so much for watching. As always, if you have any feedback, anything like that, any segments you'd like to see in the series moving forward, then be sure to leave those down in the comment section below. Once again, if you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.